what a good reporter's worth. But thank heavens for those that are willing to come out and to do the work and I guess take the heat. But once again, the Rebel's been wonderful. They've done, and again, it shows that they're getting the subscription online, and it's great. And there's again the next thing after where's the power is where's the money, because it is a huge motivator on that next level down. As Tim says, when you talk about the George Soros and those, it's about power, but for many people, it's about where the money is and where it's coming from. So thanks, Holly, for being here, and looking forward to someone making it.
Thank you all for being here. It's good to be among friends and sharing ideas. I think most people do know me from my work with the Rebel Media. I talk a lot about economies and oil and gas and pipelines and freedom issues, but a lot of people don't know that I'm also an oil and gas geologist. I've worked in the industry for over a decade now, and I'm really, really passionate about it. So that's why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about the liars that want us to believe that our oil and gas industry is evil, and I'm going to talk about the funding and the activism, and actually they're total hypocrites. I've chosen this photo on my title page. It's the Dakota Access Pipeline protesters, the ones that pretend to care about the environment the most, that leave their garbage and $1 million plus cleanup for this little party that they had that lasted months. So I think that's really good indication of the hypocrisy that we're seeing from these activists. So this is how this all plays out. Foreign backers like George Soros that have access to essentially unlimited amounts of cash funnel that money to foundations like Tides that then dole out all that money to organizations like the World Wildlife Fund or Ducks Unlimited, or whoever else will take it, in order to launch a war on these so-called philanthropists' favorite causes. Sounds pretty legit, right? A bunch of do-gooders giving their money to charity and social justice groups. Well, that couldn't be more wrong. The public sees George Soros as a philanthropist when he's actually a megalomaniac, and I'm being nice when I say that. As Dr. Tim Ball mentioned, he is evil. They see Tides as a legitimate foundation when they're actually more like a money laundering operation that's legal, and they see the organizations they fund as making social progress when they're actually full of activists ready to wage war on their favorite causes. So these activists are actually these organizations' employees, but the public doesn't see that. They see them as activists. They're professionals that show up at every protest to demonize the Canadian oil and gas industry and our pipelines and, of course, the oil sands. The left uses the most vulnerable people, like our First Nations groups that you see here in these pictures, to push their agenda. While they lose out on opportunities for prosperity and to become economically independent with the ability to pay for basic necessities that we actually take for granted, like schools, roads, and hospitals. So how much money are we talking about? Here's a Form 990 from Tides that shows an annual revenue of almost $97 million in just 2012 alone. That's in just 1 year. So imagine how many more millions they're bankrolling to fight against our industry. Oh, it's doing that thing again. I don't even know where I am now. I need to move back.
You want us to run the clicker from here? We've had a little bit of tough trouble with the podium sort of shaking and making the mouses move people ahead. Maybe Barry should use the clicker and you just tell them when to click ahead to me.
Okay, here we were. Okay, so why on earth would these people want to attack the Canadian oil and gas industry? You might ask yourself why this is happening. Why do these philanthropists funnel their money through foundations like Tides? Well, it provides them with anonymity and PR insulation. How do they do it? They're slippery fish, and they strain U.S. tax laws to create a tangled web that's hard for the general public to follow, and the money trail usually ends at tides. So why would these people want to attack Canadian oil and gas when we have the strictest regulations out there? Why would they want to attack the most ethically produced oil in the world? It's because they have something to gain from energy independence in the United States. As an aside, it's the implementation of horizontal drilling techniques that have allowed the U.S. to access their tight shale plays. This has really got the oil and gas industry booming in the United States. Do you want to? Yeah.
So sewer rats are giving us trouble.
They know I'm here. Okay, where am I now? Okay, so we're one past this one. No, we are back one. Okay, so realizing that all of this potential could be unlocked, Canada became a competitor for market space rather than being the US's top importer. And these philanthropists saw a way to make money from pretending to care about the environment. They all have investments in things that are tied to the US's oil industry. Warren Buffett, for example, invests heavily in railroads. Remember when Obama vetoed Keystone XL? Well, no pipelines means more transport by rail, which means more money in Buffett's pockets. These guys are billionaires for a reason. They're businessmen. And without pipelines, there's also more bottlenecking, which is basically a glut of oil in the system that helps to drive the price of our Canadian dilbit down. Here's an article suggesting Buffett's railroad will be more profitable because of Trump's friendly plans for coal. Some green energy advocate. Next. So why do they want to attack Canada in particular? We export our oil to the US for a discounted price, and they want to keep it that way as they progress more and more toward not needing us anymore. We became their competitor overnight with the shale boom, so why wouldn't they want our oil prices to stay low? Why wouldn't they want to block our pipelines and us from getting in the market? In just a few years after the US was unable to lock their shale plays, or was able to lock their shale plays, they surpassed the entire world in production and they lifted a 40-year export ban. They shipped their first tank of LNG last year, beating Canada to the punch because our regulations are so stringent that they actually hinder projects. We sell our bitumen to them at Western Canada Select pricing. And ironically, because we don't have a transportation network with the capacity to send oil across our own country to the east, we buy their oil back at a higher price. It's ridiculous. They are basically our only client, too. We sent something like 99% of our oil exports to the US last year. Our oil is pretty much landlocked without pipelines, and we can't sell it to anyone else. So this is all about special interests. It's about personal interests and gains. It's not about climate change or the environment, as we often hear. The moment Barack Obama denied Keystone XL, he supported a pipeline in Kenya that was proposed to go through a protected region. This is a community that relies heavily on ecotourism that revolves around the species and habitats living in these regions. But now, even though the US has lifted its oil ban and will be waiting on pipelines to be built, we have an ally in Donald Trump who seems to be proposing some Canadian-friendly policies like reversing Obama's Keystone XL decision and making sure that projects already in place aren't subject to new policies that would hurt Canada. There is hope, but I don't think the oil and gas industry will ever be the same in Alberta. We have the NDP in place who are bringing in destructive policy after destructive policy. We have the Liberals against us, and we have the activists who are still fighting and have even managed to get places on panels making decisions about Alberta oil and gas, like Zipporah Berman. So we have to go to video now. So I just wanted to show you this little video of Zipporah Berman. Rachel Notley actually hired her to an official position on an oil sands panel, lifelong activist, sitting on a panel making decisions on Alberta and gas projects. Sometimes I really feel like we just can't win with the NDP in power. So, no pipelines. Yeah, that one. Do we have sound?
We have to ensure that we don't have tankers on the way on the coast of British Columbia. And honestly, I'm encouraging people to move these pipelines. Any way that makes sense to create, to do the Gateway Pipeline or the new Kinder Morgan pipeline that you may have heard expansion through Vancouver. The idea is that we're going to dramatically increase how much oil we develop in the tar sands. That will lead to an enormous toxic legacy that your generation is going to have to clean up.
An enormous toxic legacy, holy smokes.
So that woman is making decisions for us, sitting on an official panel and implemented by Rachel Notley and the NDP. That's who we're working against. From current slide, yeah. And then next, yeah. Okay. So have the protesters won with millions in their pockets from businessmen and foundations? I don't think they've won. They've succeeded in putting a wrench in our oil sands and in our oil and gas projects, but they haven't won. We've stayed silent for too long, and it's time to fight back with facts, which brings me to the next section of my talk, the lies that the eco-activists tell us and why they're wrong. So I'm going to go through a series of myths here, and I'm hoping that I can provide you with some information to take away to fight back against the eco-activists and what they tell us. So myth one, eco-activists care about the environment. I showed you that first picture on my title page, and I think Paul said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's the mess of garbage and junk that these guys left behind after an environmental protest. We see this time and time again. There are so many examples, I'd probably have to take a couple hours just to get through them.
Can you imagine what the fine would be if an oil company left a mess like that?
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so here's another myth that drives me up the wall. Eco-activists care about minority groups and First Nations. In Canada, we're often force-fed the images of our First Nations group protesting pipelines and oil and gas projects. The Northern Gateway project was one of these projects that was vehemently protested against, but the truth is that the majority of First Nations groups that were in the direct path of the pipeline supported its construction. They were offered 10% ownership, and they knew it would be beneficial to their communities. It meant jobs, economic prosperity, and the ability to pay for much-needed infrastructure, like I mentioned before, like schools and hospitals. On most of these reserves, it's the government that funds them. That means that these communities don't always get a say in how they spend their money. Financial independence means that they would. Northern Gateway has now been denied by the Trudeau government. And if you don't believe me that it takes away from their prosperity, take it from Chief Boucher up in Fort McKay. His community has over $2 billion tucked away, and the average salary is about $120,000 a year, with a 0% unemployment rate on that reserve, all from oil and gas prosperity. So this is another one that drives me crazy. I would never bring my kid to a pipeline protest or anywhere I think would get rowdy. Do you think these kids in this picture know what the signs really mean or are about at all? So I have another video, Ezra had to make an appearance in this talk since he couldn't be here today. Fast forward it to 2:45. Yep. So this is a perfect example of how these activists use their kids.
So I was having a conversation with her daughter. It lasted about 30 seconds. I was being polite and trying to make an argument that would maybe be persuasive to a kid. And I think to her mother's horror, her kid was actually engaging with me and actually nodding yes to some of my points. I mean, hasn't the earth warmed and cooled throughout the millennia? Well, this wasn't going according to her mom's script. So she interrupted me to get her child to ask me a different question than her first one. All right, look, I'm not trying to win a karate contest against a 9-year-old, so I thought I'd move on to something friendlier, like her pretty sign. So obviously, there was climate change since we're not in an ice age anymore, right?
You believe in human, human cause.
Okay, that's not what she asked.
But you're.
What's your sign say? All right, so she was against gasoline-powered cars. So what kind of car does her family drive? What kind of car do you guys have?
Normal car.
What do you mean by normal? Is it an electric car? Don't we have electric cars right now? Like, isn't the car of the future here already? Well, Tesla is pretty successful, isn't it? Have you heard of a Tesla? Uh-oh, this was going off mom's script again. Did you hear that part about the gasoline corporations colluding to kill the electric car? Do you really think a 9-year-old child came up with that conspiracy theory herself, or do you think they made her eager beaver mom told her that too? Now, I
That's
don't think
good.
you've ever heard of a Tesla.
So the parent basically coached her child on what questions to ask, on answers. It's pretty despicable, actually. Okay, so this is one of my favorite ones. The oil sands produce the dirtiest oil on earth. It's, like I said, one of my favorites because it's just so false. Oil from the oil sands is the dirtiest on earth. That's the lie that we're always told. Actually, based on carbon intensity, the dirtiest oil in North America is just outside of Los Angeles. So where's Leonardo DiCaprio to protest in his own backyard? In fact, there are at least 13 oil fields in California that produce more GHGs than Alberta Dilbit. So this one's from Zipporah Berman herself. The oil sands look like Mordor. She's the activist that Rachel Notley hired onto her oil sands advisory group. Admittedly, the oil sands aren't a pretty sight while they're being produced, but nothing could be further from the truth once a company has finished production on site. They're actually required to reclaim this land by the government. This picture looks pretty good to me, and nothing like Mordor. I think you skipped, did you skip one? Yeah, this is it. So here's another myth, that the Canadian oil and gas industry isn't regulated and oil and gas companies have free rein in Canada. Of course, we have review panels, both provincially and federally, that come along with so much red tape, like I mentioned before. It actually hinders projects from being developed. We see this in BC, where LNG deals have been lost or almost lost because of this. And like I mentioned before, this red tape actually gets in the way of projects getting done. Although it's amazing that we can say we have the most regulated industry in the world, sometimes it's to a fault. Back one. That one, yeah. Okay, so fracking causes earthquakes. This one is a sticky one. The USGS, who are pretty much the governing body in the United States on geology, have linked these seismic events to wastewater disposal wells. So here's a video on what's thought to happen. Yeah, we do. How fracking can cause an earthquake.
the earth at depth is under stress. It's under stress from the weight of the rocks above it, and it's also under stress from tectonic stresses in the crust. When we're fracking, we're injecting pressurized fluid underground. We're doing this in order to actually make cracks in the rock of interest, in order to get the gas out. However, during your fracking operation, if you intersect a pre-existing fault, that pressurized fluid can find that fault and unpin it just a little bit and allow it to It needs to be disposed in a more permanent way. We inject fluids underground, and if it intersects a fault, it could cause an earthquake at that point.
Okay, you get the gist. Okay, so I agree with what was said in this video. We've seen it happen in Oklahoma and in other regions of the world, but what's missing is that these are usually, but not always, minor events. There's a lot of media sensationalism surrounding this topic, but the quakes are usually very small. So usually within the 2 to 4 on the Richter scale range. Next slide. It's jumping all over the place. Here we go. So usually within 2 to 4 on the Richter scale range, which is nothing to be that concerned about. They're rarely even felt by people or could make the ceiling light swing, for example. Just for comparison's sake, I wanted to show you another video of a couple weeks worth of these actual naturally occurring events. And they're, yeah, that one right there. It's not a rare occurrence. They happen naturally daily. No, not the fracking one.
You don't need sound?
The earthquake. No, we don't need sound for this one. No, global earthquake animation, yeah.
Just try turning up this. Can you just turn the speaker up? Is it loud enough?
I think that's it for my videos.
Okay, fair enough, okay.
So this is just a time lapse. You can see in the corner here. You can see that these aren't rare events. They happen daily, they happen a lot. So it's, again, just a lot of media sensationalism. I think that's good.
These are just minor earthquakes.
Very minor, yeah. The bigger bubbles,
Just look at all the
Are
ones on
bigger.
North America, though.
yeah. So here's North America right here. Look at all the activity happening there. Just small earthquakes. Okay. Fracking contaminates drinking water. Again, totally not impossible, but very rare circumstances. Fracking usually takes place several kilometers below the surface, and the fracks themselves would just rarely propagate that far to the surface at all. Not only this, but formation water itself is already considered to be toxic naturally, and frack fluids are usually only made up of about 5% chemicals that are added to water. And that tap water thing that people do, they light their tap water on fire. It's usually naturally occurring methane that organisms produce. So that's a bust too in most cases. Not all cases, but most. I kind of compare these things to modern medicine. There are risks that you're going to have to take, say for a surgery or something like that, but the chances of anything going wrong are really low and the benefits outweigh the risks. So the next myth, fracking and pipelines cause increases in GHG emissions. This ties into the eco-activists don't care about the environment myth, because if they cared, they'd be championing fracking, which provides people access to cheap, clean energy from natural gas. And pipelines replace cars and trucks and tankers, and they also use energy-efficient pumps and equipment as well. So this one is really just a no-brainer. And this is the last one that I'm going to talk about. Pipelines are unsafe. Pipelines have transported oil with a 99.99% success rate for decades, and even in the case of leaks, they're easily managed and detected. Of course, this is more media sensationalism. Every incident that occurs, the media is all over it with doomsday headlines. Actually, rail is even 99.97% safe as well, but the problem is that there's a chance of explosion when there's a collision, like in Lac Mégantic. This just makes pipelines the more safer option all around. So final comments, that's all I have for today. And I'll just end off saying that we need to be concerned about the foreign funding that's being used to attack our oil and gas industry for personal gain. Yes, Donald Trump has implemented favorable policies for Canada, but the Buffetts and Soros still need to make money. And I agree with Mark Schultz's comments yesterday. We need to speak up or we're going to lose this industry. We have oil and gas companies like Shell siding with these activists now and pushing a carbon tax on us for what I see as their gain too. We are the silent majority and we need to become louder because right now the loud minority is winning.